Way back in the 80s as a child, I used to watch a show called The Adventures of Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. The show is currently one of the longest running cartoon shows in history and is famous for teaching young children life lessons. I loved the show and watched it every day. However, by the age of 13 I stopped watching the show. I am now grown up and live in an apartment in New York. One day when I was browsing around the internet, I found a site that was selling episodes of Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. I scrolled through and saw they had a whole collection. Naturally, like most people my age, I bought the collection to relive my childhood. I received an entire DVD collection in the mail of all the seasons. Oddly enough though, there was one that I received that was on a VHS tape. I did some research on the internet, and what I got was a few posts discussing an episode of Fat Albert that aired for only a few minutes. According to the fans, the episode was just beginning to start up, but then right as the theme began to play, the show cut to static, and an announcement was made on CBS, the channel that Fat Albert originally aired on, that tonight's episode of Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids was cancelled, and another episode will play instead. Upon realization of this, I became excited not only because I now have the complete collection of my favorite shows that I loved as a kid, but I also have some rare unreleased episodes. I decided to play the episode titled Smiling first. I got out my old VHS player and plugged it into the TV, and put the VHS in. I was greeted by a black screen which just said in bold red letters, Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, smiling. From there it cut to the picture of a mouth, smiling with odd Japanese text above it. There was a rip in the screen that covered most of the last three symbols. Thankfully, I texted my friend who spoke Japanese, and he was able to tell me using the parts of the symbols that weren't cut off what they were and translate it for me. He said it translated out to, "Smiling is the max of the suffering." It was an odd way to begin, and it unnerved me for some odd reason. Now before I mention the theme, I need to mention that a lot of the intro was cut out, and only the scenes I mention are in it. The main theme began to play, except something was wrong. The song was lower and slowed down, making it sound depressing and ominous. Even weirder in the scenes where Bill Cosby was supposed to be on the stage dancing around during the theme, he wasn't there, it was just an empty background. It then cut to the scene where Albert's friends are supposed to be carrying him, but instead it was just a picture of Albert lying on the ground, and footprints leading off screen in the direction that they were carrying Albert. But what really stood out was that there were scratch marks leading in the opposite direction of the footprints. From what I could gather, I believe that the boy saw something and ran away. However, one of the boys wasn't able to get away fast enough, and it grabbed him and dragged him away. The intro then cut to the junkyard and it was abandoned and empty. It showed the instruments the Cosby Kids used for music. The instruments were lying on the ground mangled and broken. I could have sworn that on the end of one of the instruments I saw a bit of blood, as if someone had used it as a weapon and hit someone. The intro finally ended and I was quite shocked at some of the imagery I saw, but I had continued watching the episode. The episode shows the Cosby Kids and Albert playing in the junkyard. Rudy began talking about how he heard about a new girl moving into a home nearby them. Rudy went on to say, "I heard from kids who have spoken to her tell me that she's really weird. We shouldn't hang out with her." Albert then replied, "Just because she's different does not mean we shouldn't hang out with her." Before Albert and Rudy could finish their conversation, the school bell rang. Albert and the gang then hurried to school. When they arrived, they ran into the new girl. The gang introduced themselves and said hello. The new girl replied in a sad, depressed tone, "Hello, I'm Daisy." Albert then asked her if she wanted to walk to class with them. Daisy then said, "Okay, I guess so." As they walked, Albert asked what had her so down, and Daisy replied, "I just feel sad. I never had many friends. I've always been secluded, and everything just has a meaningless feel to it." Albert then replied, saying, But it's not, Daisy. Everything you do has meaning, and life is what you make of it. And when you finally realize that, you will smile and be glad I told you. Daisy then said, okay then. After school, Daisy and Albert were walking when they eventually encountered Rudy lighting a joint with his special lighter that he carries around. Albert becomes furious and warns Rudy that drugs can do things to him and make him go insane. However, Rudy brushes off what Albert said and continued. The next day, Rudy got into trouble after having an outburst and attacking a fellow classmate and beating him into near unconsciousness. Events like this continued over the course of 3 days until Albert couldn't take it anymore. He decided he would tell the school faculty that he was doing drugs to see if he could get Rudy any help. However, school was already over and Albert decided that he would wait till tomorrow to tell the school faculty. However, as Albert was walking to school, a scream bellowed from Rudy's house. Albert rushed to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. Albert quickly went home and called the police. After a few minutes, Officer Gomez and other policemen arrived at the house. They went inside, only to find Rudy's parents sitting at the dinner table dead with their heads lying against the table, and Rudy nowhere to be found. The police did an investigation of the bodies and concluded that they were poisoned. Eventually, Daisy arrived and was in terror when she saw the sight. The police began to look around the house, and Albert and Daisy decided to help and found a ventilation shaft ripped open and assumed whoever kidnapped Rudy escaped through the ventilation shaft with him. Around 10 p.m., 2 days after Rudy's disappearance, Albert sees outside a window in the dark, Rudy standing in the dark corner staring at him. Albert ran out to see him, but Rudy ran off. The following day, Daisy was nowhere to be found, and after 3 days of absence, the police put out a search. Some neighbors state they witnessed what looked like a kidnapping the night of Daisy's disappearance. The witnesses claim they saw what looked like Rudy, with a sadistic smile on his face, carrying something in a large sack away from Daisy's home. Albert then thought to himself, "It's those drugs! They're messing with Rudy's mind and making him do all those terrible things. He wasn't kidnapped, he killed his parents and climbed out the ventilation shaft." The show then cut to live-action Bill Cosby murmuring to himself, "It will not have my smile, it'll not have my smile, it'll not have my smile." Bill eventually became more aggressive and began yelling and pacing around the room like a madman. It then cuts back to the cartoon and shows Officer Gomez driving a car. His tires eventually burst from rolling across glass shards from what looked like a smashed bottle. Officer Gomez's car crashed into a wall. The front end of he crawled out and reveals that he had twisted his leg and was immobile. Rudy then appears out of a nearby alley and starts beating Officer Gomez until he is unconscious and then drags his body off into the alley. Live-action Bill Cosby then appeared on the screen and was beating himself to near death with a baseball bat, repeating over and "It will not have my smile. It'll not have my smile. It'll not have my smile." Blood. One of the stage hands eventually came out to help him, but he struck him down with the baseball bat, and then Bill Cosby continued to beat himself with the baseball bat until he was dead. It then cut back to the cartoon and showed Albert sitting and reading the newspaper. He sees in the newspaper that Officer Gomez disappeared last night, and his patrol car was found 2 blocks down from where Albert lived. Albert decided to go out and investigate. He went to the spot where Officer Gomez's car was found. He walked around the area for an entire hour searching for clues. Albert eventually found what he was looking for. It barely caught his eye, but he saw it in a nearby alley, glistening in a very thin stretch of light that just barely reached the alley. What looked like a few drops of blood. He went over to the alley and found several drops of blood leading further into the alley. What Albert found at the end of the alley was shocking. It was a severed hand. The hand had several small puncture wounds in it, as if a syringe had been stuck into it, and the blood had been drained from it, almost as if a vampire had bit it several times. Albert then tried to open the door that was right behind the severed hand, but it was blocked off by some object. Albert then called the police. The police arrived and took the hand as evidence and did an investigation of the alley. They found nothing else but the drops of blood in the hand. The hand was eventually confirmed to be Officer Gomez's hand. Albert was still in shock from that day, and he suspected that Rudy was behind it all. Albert got the remaining gang together and decided that they would look for Rudy to confront him. They searched and searched but found nothing. However, after a few hours of searching, Russell got bored and wandered off. The rest of the gang noticed this and went looking for him. They eventually found Russell standing in an alley staring at Rudy. Rudy then grabbed Russell and ran off of him and had a huge grin on his face. They followed Rudy without him noticing, and Rudy led them to a warehouse. Albert decided the gang should stay out here and wait. The rest of the gang thought he was crazy, but Albert wanted to see if he could talk some sense into Rudy. Albert entered the warehouse and saw Rudy standing across from Rudy, facing in the opposite direction. Standing in the middle of the length between Albert and Rudy was Russell just standing there. Albert then yelled, "Russell, get over here before Rudy hurts you!" Rudy then turned around and pointed a desk lamp towards Russell. The light revealed that it was simply a dummy. Albert had been fooled. Albert then yelled, "Rudy, don't you see what you're doing? You're hurting people. You need to turn yourself in." Rudy did not respond, but instead turned around. His eyes were dark and cold, and he had such a big smile on his face. Rudy then stood aside to reveal a body right behind him. The body was hanging upside down from the ceiling, and its face was skin, showing only an underlayer of muscle and tissue. The body was also wearing Rudy's clothes. This confused Albert because the Rudy that had done all these things was also wearing the same clothes. However, he didn't have to wait long before the answer was revealed. Dark-eyed Ruby grabbed his face and pulled it off like a mask, revealing that it was Daisy behind all of it. Albert stood dumbfounded and in terror at what he saw. Suddenly it all made sense. It wasn't Rudy that was doing this. It was Daisy running around with similar clothes and wearing his face like a mask. Albert then said, "Why are you doing this, Daisy?" Daisy then replied, "Because, Albert, I can never smile, but now I can for the faces of other people." Albert then replied, "But what about Officer Gomez's hand in the alley? It looked like it had several puncture wounds." Daisy then said, "Why don't I show you?" She shined a desk lamplight on her hanging body. This one was wearing a police officer uniform and was also skinned. It was no doubt that it was Officer Gomez's body, not only because it had a police officer outfit on, but because it was missing a hand. She pulled down his police shirt, revealing his stomach, and it revealed that his entire body was covered in puncture wounds from what looked like needles. Daisy then said, "I eventually began to feel sad again, even though I was wearing a smile, so I decided that I would drain the blood and stomach acid from the people I collected. What I do with the blood and stomach acid is I take it to a friend I know and he makes it into a smokable drug. The drug makes me feel happy, but I'm still not able to smile from it. So if I were to smile and use the drugs to make me feel happy, I'll have a smile if I keep both on them." Albert replied sharply, "But why did you cut off Officer Gomez's hand in the first place?" Daisy then replied in a maniacal manner, "He tried to grab me by my throat with his hand, so I cut it off. I didn't want to waste the blood in his hand, so I took a syringe in a jar. I had drained the blood from his hand into the jar." Daisy then laughed and said, "However, that is not important. What is the fact that you are the happiest person I know, and thus I need your smile." Daisy then pulled out a large knife covered in blood. Blood glistened in the light from the moon showing through the crack of the ceiling. This sight made Albert sick. Albert ran for the door, but Daisy got to it before him, locked it, and swallowed the key. Albert then said, "No, you won't have my smile, and you'll never take anyone else's smile ever again." Albert then ran for some old gasoline cans, which he spotted, and picked one of them up and poured it on Daisy. It got into her eyes, and she screamed and began rubbing her eyes. Daisy eventually rubbed it off her eyes and was able to see again. She then charged with her knife, ready to skin him. Albert then remembered the lighter that Rudy always carried around, which he last used for smoking the drugs that his friend gave him. Albert ran for Rudy's body and reached into his pocket, and was relieved to see his lighter in his pocket. Albert then turned around and lit the lighter. Daisy stopped and looked at Albert, and before she could run away, Albert said, "Hey, hey, hey, it's time to play." Albert tossed the lighter at Daisy and she was ignited. She ran around the room screaming as she burned. She eventually fell onto the other gasoline cans, causing a large explosion of fire. The fire grew and began to engulf the building. Eventually, it covered almost the entire warehouse, and the boys saw the light from the fire inside and the smoke coming from the door. They tried to get it open by kicking and ramming it, but nothing worked, and eventually the place burned down with Albert in it. The police and fire department arrived and found Albert half dead and buried in large amounts of rubble. They managed to pull him out and put him on a stretcher and roll him off into an ambulance. Albert then looked up and saw a charred body holding the knife that Daisy tried to use to kill him. He assumed that was Daisy. He also saw that Russell was back with the rest of the gang. Albert then put his head back down and rested, knowing that they found Russell and ended Daisy. They then loaded Albert into the ambulance and it drove off. The episode then ended and cut to a static shot of Daisy wearing Rudy's face. This went on for a whole minute, and I felt as if Daisy was staring at me through the screen. The episode then cut to black. I didn't know what to think. I was feeling so many things at the moment. Fear from what I just saw, anger at the person who sent this to me thinking it would be a funny joke, and relief that Albert had made it out alive. Despite all these feelings, I knew one thing for sure. I had to destroy this VHS tape. I took it and smashed it into bits with a hammer along with the entire complete DVD collection. Then I burned them just for safe measure. Is this the only copy? I'm not sure, but take this as a warning to whoever is reading this. If you receive a VHS copy of a Fat Albert episode titled Fat Albert Smiling, then immediately destroy it. So that was Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, Smiling by Teenage 7-Eleven, a Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids lost episode Creepypasta. What do I think about the story? By my sighing and breathing, that obviously means it was not a good story. Let's start with the grammatical errors at the beginning and throughout the story. Because, my God, there are so many. It is ridiculous. Like, commas are not... There are places where sentences don't end in a run-on sentences, man. That is my big beef here. That is one of the big beefs here. If tonight 7-Eleven, please improve on your work and fix this and fix the structuring a little bit. Thank you. Let's move on to the blood and gore cliches as well as the intro theme being different. Those cliches can work, but in a different context. Like have it just be unexpected or something, or expected or something. And the blood and gore could just be, this is actually a bootleg or something. But it doesn't make sense in this story because, well, it just does not really make sense for a network to do something like that. And the protagonist buys the DVD set, the complete series from eBay, yeah. That's a possibility, but the VHS tape, it would have said something like that in the description of the item you are buying on eBay or Amazon or whatever. And don't even begin on the Mission Impossible shit. Like, at the one point in the story. He climbed through the vents or something. So Rudy is this super villain or something that has unique moves or something. He's not Mission Impossible, man. This is not Mission Impossible. This is a creepypasta. Okay? So, in the story we meet Daisy. A sad and depressed, lonely schoolgirl, I guess, who can't be happy for some reason. And out of nowhere, Rudy starts acting violent for no reason. And Albert just says, hey, I'm going to snitch on my friend to get him help. Because he was concerned that he was hurting people as well. Yeah, but you're a snitch, Albert. You are a snitch for doing that. And Rudy just staring at Albert during that one time. It makes sense. But it just comes out of nowhere. But then when we get to the absolute live action part, Bill Cosby beats himself up with a baseball bat and killing himself. I'm sorry, what? But he's not dead, he's alive. He is alive. Look on Google. He is currently alive. Okay? He's currently alive. Also, the plot twist of Daisy being the evil villain that kills people and puts their body fluids together to make a smokable drug. I'm pretty sure that smokable drug would not even work in a realistic sense. Because it just would not work in my opinion. I think Rudy should have been the main villain of this. Like, have it be a PSA where Rudy goes too far and shit. Just have it be a PSA. Like the other Fat Albert PSAs. Whatever. And then, the end of the story, the protagonist destroys the VHS tape because he thinks it's probably possessed or something. And it creeped him out. When he just obviously kept it for proof later down the line. Now, going back to the Daisy is the true villain of that story controversy, not controversy, it's plot point. I'm pretty sure that somebody that's depressed does not do half the shit that Daisy does in this story. We call those people sociopaths. Or psychopaths or whatever. Because they, murder. Okay? Okay, murder. She made a smokable drug out of fluids and killed people as a result because she's not happy. That's not how depression usually works. But except if you have some underlying condition also. So I can understand why. Oh my god, this story is awful. So, yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on this. And my final score of this is a 3 out of 10. It's an awful story, but it's not as bad as other creepypastas. I see some potential in this to be better, and thank God the remake proved me that there is potential in this. The remake is all I can do is smile, which is better than the original. Trust me, go read that if it's still on the Lost Episode Creepypasta Wiki. So, I am Lord Phantom, and I'll see you guys next time for my next video, which is my thoughts. Hell of a Boss Part 2. So see you guys next time.